Hi girls, as I mentioned, I will talk about this chapter test so that you can revise for your upcoming chapter test and your midterm exams. I still haven't got a date for your upcoming chapter test from you girls, so make sure you give me as soon as possible so that I can arrange a time with your form teacher. As we only have like a week or a little bit more than a week, so make sure you give me the date as soon as possible. So for the one who were absent last time, this upcoming chapter test is about your straight line equations and also your chapter 13. I just want to make sure that you understand how the exam's gonna ask about your straight line equations and you know how to do it. So therefore, it's just a second chance for you to get a higher mark. So if last time you didn't do well, then this time if you get a better marks, then I will just count the ones that you get better marks. So let's have a look at the multiple choice first. So question 1. In the figure, the equation of straight line equation is y equals mx plus c. And this y equals mx plus c is already in the form that I teach you about the straight line equation. So you know that your m is going to be your gradient. Your c is going to be your y-intercept. So by looking at the graph, here is your y-intercept. So this is your c. And it is below 0, so you know c is smaller than 0 is a negative number, so choice B and D fits your criteria. And when we look at the gradient, so this line is coming from this way to this, and this directions of a line, you know it gives you a positive gradient, so therefore your m has to be greater than 0, and therefore your answer is B. So question 2, in the figure, AB is parallel to CD, so you already know that it is telling you your gradient AB equals your gradient of CD, and it asks for the values of A. Here is your A. For gradient, remember how to find a gradient. We use the difference of the y coordinates and divided by the difference between the x coordinates. So in this case, for your gradients of AB, we look at the coordinates and we got -1 minus 0. 0 minus -2 equals 0 minus A, and 4 minus 0. So rearrange it, we have -1/2 equals -8/4, and your A will be 2. So your answer is C. Number 3, if the lines y equals mx plus b and the other line x/a plus y/b equals 1 are perpendicular, so we know that the gradient from this line times the gradient from this line will equals -1 because it says they are perpendicular. By looking at the gradient, the first line y equals mx plus b is actually in the form of y equals mx plus c already. So m here is your gradient, and this is the unknown they're asking you to find. For the second line, we can't tell what is the gradient immediately, so we have to rewrite it in the form of your y equals mx plus c. So just rearrange your stuff. So now the whole equation times b, and arrange it in the form of y equals mx plus c. So y equals m x plus c. So you can tell that this is your gradient for this line. So therefore your m is A/B, which is A. So number 4, it says P is a point on a line segment joining A and B. So A, we got a coordinate. It's always good to draw it out because a lot of you didn't know that P is the point that in between it. So here is P, we give it a coordinate called x and y, and the information they give you is the coordinate of A and B, and also they tell you the ratio. So once you have the ratio, you know they're talking about the section formula. So by considering the coordinate of x, here we can say that x equals 1 times -10 plus 5 times 14 divided by 1 plus 5, and you will have 10 here. So consider the y-coordinate of p. 1 times -3 plus 5 times 9 divided by 1 plus 5 equals 7. So your x-coordinate and y-coordinate of p should be 10 and 7. So the answer is D. So question 5. Look at the figure. It says PQR are the midpoints of OA, OB, OA, and AB. So in here, you know that you have to use the midpoint formula to do something. So for the midpoint formula is just your x coordinates plus together divided by 2 and y coordinates plus together divided by 2. So let's look at it. P is the midpoint of O and B, and for O they didn't tell you, but O is the origin, so it's 0, 0 for the coordinates. So to find the coordinates of P, so let's write here, we know that it is B plus 0 divided by 2, and then C plus 0 divided by 2, and because when you plus 0 there's nothing there, so it's B over 2 and C over 2. Then we look at we got point P, then look at point Q. Q is the midpoint of the OA. So again, look at the coordinates of Q. So it is A plus 0 divided by 2, so it's A divided by 2, and then 0 plus 0 divided by 2, so it's just 0. So we got both of those coordinates, and in part 1 they talk about coordinates of K. K is bisect PQ, meaning that this K cuts through the PQ. So when it cuts through PQ, PK and QK has the same length. This is what it meant by bisect. So in this case here, PK equals KQ. So therefore, you know that we can find the coordinate of Q again using the midpoint formula. So by looking at the coordinate of PQ, so A over 2 plus B over 2, and the whole thing divided by 2 is the x-coordinate of K, and the y-coordinate of K is C over A plus 0 divided by 2, and therefore the coordinate of K is A plus B divided by 4 and C divided by 4. So therefore, number 1 is true. And it asks you about coordinates of R. R is here, and again it is the midpoint of AB. So in this case here, your coordinates of R, you just have to use the point B and point A. So you have A plus B divided by 2 plus 0 plus C divided by 2. Sorry, I mean comma. So you got a y-coordinate and x-coordinate, just to simplify it, A over B plus C and C over 2. And therefore, number 2 is true as well. So is K the midpoint of OR? So you got your coordinates of R and O, so you can have your OR, and it asks you is K the midpoint. So it's actually saying that if there's a line here, is K gonna cut them in between? So we can just, by looking at the midpoint of OR, because you have the coordinates of O and R already. So by looking at it, we will just say 0 plus A over B, A plus B over 2 divided by 2, and 0 plus C over 2 divided by 2. And you simplify it, you got A plus B over 4 and C over 4. So is K the midpoint? Just look at it. So this is our midpoint OR. And if we look at the coordinates of K, they are the same. So since they are the same, we can say that K is the midpoint of OR. So 1, 2, 3 is correct as well. So the answer will be D. Number 6, you have a similar questions in the previous chapter test already. Here, let's look at it separate. Let's look at the positive gradients first. So you know from this direction, these two are the positive gradients, and by looking at it, your L3 is steeper than L4. So therefore, we can say the gradient of L3 is greater than the gradient of L4. Then we look at the negative ones. So let's look at the negative gradients. So L2 and L1 in this direction, we know that it is negative gradients. So the gradient for a steeper gradient, it is this one. It looks steeper, but for the negative slope, because it has a negative sign, so we know that if this line looks steeper, but the size of the gradient is actually smaller. So in this case, is M1 is greater than M2. And we know that the positive one is of course bigger than the negative one. So M3 greater than M4, and then greater than M1 and greater than M2. But in this case, look at their sign, they are looking at in different directions. So therefore, you have to make sure your signs are on the same directions, because mine are not. So now we have to look at oppositely. So M2 has to start first, smaller than M1, and then it should be smaller than M4, so which is this one, and smaller than M3. So your answer in here should be C. So this is all about your multiple choice questions. Any questions so far? So if no, we will look at the long questions. So by looking at this graph, they ask you about the gradient of line L. So we have to look at the points that is on this line. So choose 2 points so that you can find the gradient. So I will choose this point here because you can see that the line is exactly on the dots here, and this one you got 2 and 4 here, so this is a 3 in the y-axis, so it should be 0, 3 for this point. And I will look at another point. This point here, look at it is exactly on the points there, so it lies on the line, and you can see that the x-coordinate is -4 and the y-coordinate is 6. A lot of you choose this point, but if you look at it carefully, you can see that this point here, if you consider the 6 and -2 point, is not exactly on the line here, so you cannot use this point. Always choose a point that is exactly on the line. So the gradient of L equals your y-coordinate difference, so 6 minus 3, and then the difference of your x-coordinate. So here you go, you got -3/4. In part B, it says to write down your equation, and you can see there's only 1 marked. So write down the equation of the line. It means that it wants it to be in the y equals mx plus c. So y equals our gradient. We have to write down the gradient from here. So -3/4 is your gradient. Mx. So what is my c? I don't need to calculate it, but you can look at your graph. Is your y-intercept, so it is 3. So make sure the things I highlighted here, you have to replace it with a number. Don't write y equals mx plus c you have to replace your m and your c by finding the numbers of it. So part C, it says if the equation of straight line is parallel to your L. So there's another line here which parallels to L. So when you know it parallels, because the straight line parallel to L, so therefore the gradient of the straight line equals gradient of L. So therefore the gradient of the straight line is -3/4 as well. And then it says pass through the points here. So when your x equals -4, y equals -2, so now we substitute all these numbers into the equation to find a new c. So here my y is -2, so it is in the form of this y equals mx plus c. So y equals my m, my x, and c. So in this case, we solve it. Your c should be -5. So again, it is asking the equation of straight line, so make sure you write the final line. So y equals our gradient times x, and then your c. So this is your final answer. So question 8, it says find the equations of the straight line which pass through the points 3 and then -1 and is perpendicular to this equation 2x plus y minus 6 equals 0. So here it gives you the points where it's passed through, and they give you this line here. So you have to find the equation of straight line that is perpendicular to this 2x plus y minus 6 equals 0. When it says perpendicular, you know that they're talking about the two gradients times each other gives you -1. But from here, you can't tell what is my gradient. So the first part, you have to find the gradient by rearranging your equation. So always make sure you rearrange it in the form of y equals mx plus c. So everything, put it onto the other side. So you got -2x plus 6. So therefore, you know the gradient of this line here is -2. So the other line, because straight line is perpendicular to 2x plus y minus 6 equals 0, so you know that the gradient of the straight line times this -2 here has to be equals to -1. So therefore, your gradient of your straight line is equals to 1/2. So with the new gradients, then you can now find the equation of straight line of this, because it's tell you passing through the points here. So when x equals 3, y equals -1, so substitute into the equation y equals mx plus c. So y equals mx plus c. So in this equation, you will find your c. So -1 equals 3/2 plus c. And therefore, your c is -1 minus 3/2. So it is -5/2. And again, make sure you write the final line, because it asks you to find the equation of it. So the equation of it will be y equals your gradient x minus your c. So make sure you plug in these numbers here. So always when you got a point and you got a line, then you have to find the gradient and substitute the number in order to find your new equations of straight line. And part B, it says find the coordinates of the point of intersections of the line with this equation and the other equations. So you got two equations, and whenever it says point of intersections, it means that two lines here, it cross, and this intersection is the x and y with here. So by finding your point of intersection, you just have to solve your equation simultaneously. So for simultaneous equation, we always name it so we don't have to write it out again and again, the names. So in this case, there's no equations of the subject, so we can just rearrange it a little bit. From the equation 2, we rearrange it so that we have a new equation, x equals 3 plus 8y. So we know that the x and the y is the same x and y in all those equations. So here they are all the same, so therefore I can always substitute it into the other ones. So substitute number 3 into number 1. So because you get something from your number 2, never put it back into number 2. So here your x, so 2, this x here, will replace it by 3 plus 8y plus y minus 6 equals 0. So now you only have one unknown in this equation. So to solve it, you just solve it like what you did usually. So 6 plus 16y plus y minus 6 equals 0. So 70y equals 0. So y equals 0. Then we have a look at it. We got our y. So we got our y, then we substitute y equals 0 into equation 3 so that we can find our x. So x equals 3 plus 8, 0. So 3 plus 0, so your x is 0. So therefore, point of intersection is 3, 0. So again, for the point of intersection, you can use your simultaneous equation to solve it. It doesn't matter you use the method of substitutions or you use the method of eliminations. I know that some of you are not familiar with this simultaneous equation, so therefore I will post a video or upload some notes about simultaneous again. I will post it separately, so you can have a look at it, how you do your simultaneous equation. So if there's no questions, we will go to the last one. So question 9, it says in the figure, P is a midpoint of AB. Find the coordinate of P, and if Q is a point on the perpendicular bisector of AB, find the value of K, and are the 3 points on the same straight line? So let's look at it step by step. So the first part, they just tell you P is the midpoint. So therefore, you know you have to use your midpoint formula to find your P. So you got a coordinate of A, coordinate of B. So all you have to do is use your midpoint formula. So minus 6 plus 2 divided by 2. 1 plus 5 divided by 2. And therefore, your coordinate of P is minus 2 and 3. So this one is easy. And if Q is a point on the perpendicular bisector, it means that because Q is on the perpendicular bisector of AB, which means it's talking about this. So therefore, your gradient of AB times the gradient of PQ is -1. So 5 minus 1 divided by 2 minus 6 times k minus 3 minus 5 minus -2 equals -1. So simplify it, and you will have k minus 3 equals 6, so your k equals 9. And for the last part, part C, it says, are these 3 points on the same straight line? Explain your answer. So slope PQ, because you know when they're asking about same straight line, if they're on the same line, then your slope should be the same. So therefore, we just have to find the slope of 2 of the points. It can be PQ, PR, or QR. So either of those, you find the slope of 2 of those. Then if they are the same, then you can tell that they are on the same straight line. So -2, then I will do PR. So because the slope of PQ equals slope of PR, so we can say that the 3 points P, Q, R are on the same straight line. So this is all about this chapter test. So make sure you have a look at it. If you don't understand, then ask, okay? If there's no problem, then